I knew I wanted to be a composer from a pretty young age. And, I think of myself, so as a composer, I write music, but I think of myself probably less as a composer, more as a maker. And since I was a kid, I loved making things, and that could be, drawing pictures or like building little things out of wood, you know, creating something, creating a world. And really I found myself doing that in music alone, which is just one way of making. But even from the age of probably 7 or 6, I had a piano at home, and I would just pound on the piano, and I wouldn't be playing the music that I was supposed to be practicing, but I would be making up my own sound worlds. And, to the annoyance of my parents, really, and my sister, who had to hear me pounding away at the piano. But for me, always making something, always making a world, and in this case, musical world, gave me so much excitement. I could spend hours and hours and hours doing that. I mean, it's kind of incredible that I get to make a career and a living doing that. More pressure now because I have deadlines and I have expectations of audiences and companies, but it's kind of like the same wonder that I had as a young kid. So the path to becoming a composer really looks different for every composer. A lot of my friends have advanced degrees from universities, like PhDs or masters, that they've studied composition formally. For me, that really was not my path. As a young person, I took a lot of music lessons, studied the piano, studied voice, and really just did it for fun. But then as I continued going, like in my early teen years, took more of the exams and courses that really gave me a strong foundation. So like theory, counterpoint history, just learning about all of Western music at least. But then had some amazing teachers who just sent me home with recordings of and I'm talking extreme things. So not just Beethoven and Bach, but like rock music and really strange choral music from remote communities that sounded nothing like anything I'd ever heard, really kind of out there contemporary music. So I was just hearing sort of all kinds of sounds. And then really developing my ability to kind of understand music as the making of sounds. And so that was really my path. I did a lot of personal study in scores, which is like printed music, based on recordings and that kind of thing, and then studying with private teachers. So that was my journey. Don't have any advanced degrees in music or in composition, but have just been continually in the mindset of being a learner or a student. Like I'm 41, and I think I will never stop being a student. And that might sound intimidating for people who are like, I just want to get out of high school and be done. But to me, it's not about like taking tests and exams and having to sit through a class, but it's just being curious about the world. Like, wow, how does that function? Or, wow, how did that composer make that piece? What are the parts of it? Let me just break it apart and figure it out. It's kind of like taking a clock and dismantling it to figure out how it works and then trying to put it back together to see if it could work again. That's sort of what I do with music. And then I go, okay, well, I've seen how a clock can be taken apart, put back together. Maybe I could make my own clock. Maybe I could listen to the sounds that are going on in my own head and that I could create myself and making a clock, or a musical clock, I guess. So the bulk of the work that I write would be like contemporary classical or art music. There's different ways of calling it. But sometimes I get to step outside of that and write very different things. I just wrote the score to a film. It's a short film, but the filmmaker, so the director, the person who wrote the screenplay, and the production really wanted something that felt. They gave me a few examples of TV shows that they felt were a good reference point, and then said, make something like that. And they ended up sounding like probably more like video game music or something you might hear on like the top 40. And it was a real challenge for me because it was working in a different language in a different way. So I do get opportunities to write outside of the classical world. I'd say what comes probably most naturally, probably just because I practice it the most, I do it the most, is sort of a classical sound. But again, like I really don't discriminate in music. I think music is just an organization of sound, and I try to keep my definitions around being a composer as an organizer of sounds. And whether that comes out sounding like something you'd hear like on the radio or in a recording or like a streaming service, or something you'd see on a TV show, something you'd hear in the background when playing a video game, or something you go to a concert hall like the Toronto Symphony might play. That to me is all fair game, and I want to be comfortable kind of swimming in that big pool. So between writing purely instrumental music, no singers, or writing things for singers, I mean, do I have a preference? I'd say that I do the most writing with singers and texts in mind. So that seems the most natural, probably just because, again, like it's kind of like for anybody, right? You do something enough, or the bulk of the work that you do is in this one way. It feels the most comfortable, it feels the easiest. I love the challenge of stepping across that line and moving away from vocal music, because it really forces me to think differently. So, good example, when I'm setting a text, the text gives me structure. It gives me, like, roughly there may be some music that starts before the singer or singers start singing, and then there might be something that happens after. There might be little bits in between, but roughly the text is kind of anchoring what that music will be. When you pull the text away, what are you left with? You're left with kind of like an open bowl or an open opportunity to write music. How do you know when it starts? How do you know where it moves through? You have to almost create your own text to give you the shape of the piece. So I find it a little scarier to write just instrumental music, because that structure or shape isn't already inbuilt, and I have to kind of create it later. But it's a good challenge for me to have, because then I start thinking about structure and form differently between the types of work that I write. So the life of a composer it's probably very different than the life many people would think of. I use Instagram and different social media services to show the work that I do. And usually the pictures that I'll post include me in a suit or some fancy clothes, and I'm at a big party, and it looks really, really, glamorous, right? You're like, wow, your life is so glamorous. I think that's probably like 0.1% of my life and my work as a composer. Really, the bulk of my time, 95% of my time, is really spent alone, usually in an office, usually with a computer monitor, a keyboard, some paper around, and a desk, and a lot of quiet. And I sit in that space, and I'm asking myself constantly, what's the next note? Okay, so let's try this. It doesn't feel right. Well, what if I did this? And I'm always sort of assessing what the next thing is. What's the next rhythmic thing? What's the next, is it a long note or a short note? I sit in a room asking about 1 million questions a day, and sometimes I'll come back the next day and be like, oh, I don't know that I had the best answer there. Let me try a different path. That's really my life. It's quite boring. If you were to put a camera in the room and film it, you'd be like, what's that guy doing just sitting there doing nothing all day? That's the life of a composer. The other little bit of the life of a composer is, and this is one of the most exciting parts, is when you get a piece of music finished and you hand off. In my case, I'm handing off physical copies of the music, or digital copies, like PDF file, to the musicians. And then they meet up, and I get to be there, and they just try the work out for the first time. And usually they have 1 million questions. What did you mean by this? Were you hoping for this? And sometimes I go, I don't even know what I meant there. And it's an opportunity for me to kind of figure out what the piece is. That 5% of my life is maybe the most exciting part. It's usually not the part that also makes it onto Instagram, but it's a life that's a very quiet life. And you'd think that writing music would be a really loud life. It's a very quiet life of sitting in silence and listening very intently to the music in your brain that you're trying to fashion. The first 15 minutes of sitting down in a room to write is the worst, because you have all of the paralysis of like, I'm going to start doing a hard thing and my brain doesn't want to do a hard thing. It's like, oh, I can clean the floor. Like I'd do any other activity that that would be available. But to get in that, and then the best part, the thing I love most is when I make it through the first 15 minutes of hard work, of really just starting something, right? And I think we all can feel that. And then the next 2 hours go by and I'm not even aware that 2 hours went by. And I think it's been described before as going into a flow state where you really turn off your inner critic and just ideas start connecting almost naturally. And I can emerge from that, period of time, 2 hours, and there's this whole bit of music that I've just written, and it might be a lot of music. And I don't even remember writing that. That's a really special experience to have as a composer or creative. So there were some really important pieces of music in my life. There were 2 operas when I was really young. One was written in the 40s and one was written in the 20s, I guess. The first one is called Wozzeck by Alban Berg, and it's this, if you hear it, it almost feels like metal music, but from like 100 years ago. It's really noisy and messy, and it's wild. It's this kind of hour and a half of like, what the heck did I just experience? I first heard a recording of this as a kid, and I was like, what? You can do this in music? Like, this is amazing. And that really got me excited. And then the second opera is called Peter Grimes by a composer named Benjamin Britten. And it's a lot more accessible in terms of to the ear, but it has this like punch, this intensity of drama that pushes you through 3 hours, and you're like, did 3 hours just go by? About this man who's at odds with his fishing village. He lives in like a little seacoast somewhere in England, and there's an angry mob scene. I mean, there's storm sequences that happen where the orchestra plays all these storm interludes. It is incredible music, and I fell in love as a kid. I think for me now, I'm most impressed, and this is like a new thought for me, so I'll share this, but I'm most impressed when I listen to more like a pop song, and I get this really emotional experience with it. And I try to figure out, why am I having this really intense emotion with this pop song? And then the question in me as a composer is to go, how do I bring something of that emotion into the work that I do normally? I remember like a song from a bunch of years back, but Chandelier by Sia was really, I was like, why am I having this deep emotional, almost like in tears reaction to this music and to this song? And I was listening to it. I mean, I was one of the contributors to the multi-billion views on YouTube, probably, of the music video and the song in its many iterations, because there's something raw and emotional about it. And I think we all have that with songs that we love or artists that we listen to a lot. They just bring us to a place and bring us to an emotional place, almost an escape place. And I love that. So I'm just as moved by a great contemporary song or pop song. And I'm really curious to figure out how to pull something of the magic of that back into the work that I do, which is maybe more traditional, but I want to make that kind of audience have that kind of reaction that I feel sometimes and just really live for.